For those who are joining the recording, my name is Kristen Delaney. I'm the Special Projects Manager of Indiana Disability Rights. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a person with an invisible disability. We're joined by Grace Kestler, who is the Executive Director of the ARC of Bartholomew County and a City Councilor for Columbus, Indiana. And you can see up here what we'll be talking about tonight, and wanted to give a quick disclaimer that this is a nonpartisan, non-political activity that is for informational purposes only. IDR does not endorse any candidates for office or any political parties. IDR's focus is helping people to understand their voting rights so that they can make informed decisions. IDR has spent several years educating the community about their voting rights, and we thought that it's time to increase attention and capacity of the community to be fully represented in the entire election process. Since Grace herself is an elected official with disability, she's the perfect person to talk with us tonight about how you can move beyond casting your ballot into further civic engagement. But before we get into all of those opportunities to be involved with elections, I want to talk about why it matters. 60 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln famously delivered the Gettysburg Address. We're not here for a history lesson, so I'll keep it brief, but his vision of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people is so important. And it's really reminiscent of the saying that we have in the disability community about nothing about us without us. I'd like to break down the three components that he points out here, starting at the end, a government for the people. This means that it represents us and our issues. It means that elected officials carry our message and influence the policies that impact our day-to-day lives. Elected officials decide the budget for schools where students with disabilities learn, decide the availability of accessible transportation, and they decide support for Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and work incentives. That's what it means when a government is for us. A government by the people means that we decided it. We made our voice known through voting, through supporting candidates who care about our issues, and by contacting our elected officials to let them know what matters most to us. And what we're really here for tonight is a government of the people. That means we have to be willing to get involved. It requires us to do something about the things that we care about. Imagine going to a parade and campaigns going by, and you recognize people with disabilities that are supporting those campaigns. They're part of that parade. Imagine going to the polls and it's a person with a disability who checks you in. Then imagine reviewing your ballot and seeing the name of a person with a disability on it. And finally, imagine looking up your representative and they are championing disability rights and the issues that you care most about. When we see people we relate to, it makes it that much easier for us to get involved. So when you get involved, you make a difference for schools, for transportation, for social programs. You make a difference in your life and the lives of the disability community. This government of the people, by the people, for the people that President Lincoln talked about, he did it in that order on purpose, because in order for it to be for the people, it first has to be of the people, and that includes us. So, if there's nothing else that you take away from today, please understand that voting is the single most important thing that you can do. You have the right to vote privately and independently. You have the right to vote even if you have a guardian. You have the right to disability-related assistance while voting if you want it. And you have the right to vote in an location. And with that in mind, let's move over to how we can be represented fully in the election process by hearing from Grace about some other opportunities for civic engagement.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. And I'm so excited to be here tonight with IDR. I am a lifelong resident of Indiana, and I was just telling Kristen, I grew up here in Columbus and found my way back to really enjoy getting engaged in the community, whether that's through volunteerism and now through more of the, voter political side, I suppose. But part of my enjoyment really circulates around engaging with people. And as Kristen said, the best, community we can have and the best government we can have is one that encourages and advocates for all members of our society to be engaged. And so, as they say, democracy works best when everyone's involved. And so I've just really enjoyed my role through the ARC and through City Council, and just encouraging individuals to get out and be engaged in, whatever manner that you're able to, and supporting the disability voice as well. And so that's been a large talking point for me, is some of what Kristen mentioned about disability voter rights. We are constantly educating individuals in our community related to the ARC and what their rights are, and the general community. So I hope that we can bring you some more knowledge tonight. And I'm sure, I'm hoping everyone on the call maybe has voted in some way or another in some election. And when you're there, you probably interact with a poll worker. And so these individuals are, I imagine in some communities they are volunteers, but in a number of communities they're actually paid paid positions, I suppose. So they are individuals who have signed up and been trained to work at the polls. And this is a great opportunity to just understand how the election works, everywhere down to the voting machines, getting a better understanding of the accessibility of the voting machines, the check-in process, to even just folding everything up and taking it back to the clerk's office, or at least what we do here. And so, as a poll worker, it's also a great way to just meet people in your community, depending on what poll station you might work at. Here in Columbus, it's great that we do not have assigned poll stations. So no matter where you live, you can visit any of the poll booths on voting day. But maybe you choose to work at a busier one. So a great way to get engaged and meet people in your community. But a couple of those things that you get to do when you're a poll worker are obviously guiding people through the process, assisting voters. You might be checking individuals in as far as checking their ID. If it's a primary election, you might be helping them sort out which ballot they are choosing. And then ultimately just showing them how the voting machine works. And we know that many individuals, especially maybe if it's their first time voting, it can be a little overwhelming, or at least it was for me, especially if there are a lot of questions on the ballot and things like that. And so the poll worker's job is to help guide them through that process. Obviously, they can't influence your vote, and they should not be doing that in any sort of way. But you can guide them through the process and help an individual understand how the machine works, or make reasonable accommodations for them as well. I'll let you go to the next slide, Kristen. So I kind of already talked about this. I made 3 slides, but I realized they're very similar. And so one primary thing that poll workers do here in Indiana is verifying voter ID and your registration. Obviously, there is a registration deadline that individuals have to meet in order to vote locally. Or really anywhere in Indiana on election day, or early voting, depending on if your community has early voting. Those 2 things have to be checked. And then the ballot is distributed on the machine based on where those individuals' addresses might be. Another important factor, I think, as we consider elections these days, part of your job as a poll worker is to make people feel comfortable and make them recognize that this is a welcoming space. We want people to understand that voting is, it's friendly. you are welcome here, because obviously we want everyone to be able to vote. And so there can be, depending on your community size or the vote center, we know there can be long lines, wait times, and potentially individuals who might not be following, might not be voting in the right area, for example. I'll give you an example here in Columbus. We overlap a lot with our county. And this year, there are city elections, and sometimes people come in and they think, well, my address says Columbus, so I think it's time for me to vote, but they're actually in the county. And so we have to have those conversations just to help them understand that, well, this is a city election. You'll be able to vote in these other years for county or state type of elections. And so a great opportunity to educate individuals about where they live and who their elected officials are. And I know that can be a little confusing sometimes if you're on a county city line. As I mentioned, it is a paid opportunity in a lot of counties. I'm not positive if every county, but at least here, I imagine the larger communities. And, a great way to get engaged if you're wondering how to become a poll worker is if you're currently involved in your local party. You can reach out to your party chair. They should be able to connect you with that opportunity. And if not, or if you prefer not to connect with the local party, you can go straight to the clerk, whether that's the clerk's office or give them a phone call and just sign up for that opportunity. Every community should have an application-based process. And I guarantee they're all looking for volunteers or paid individuals, just because it can be hard to find that many individuals, depending on how big your community is and how many polls you have across the community. So a great way to lend your talents and your time if you're able to on election day. I should also mention, if your community has early voting, and I believe many communities in Indiana do, you don't have to necessarily just do it on election day. Maybe you want to do it, Monday through Friday, all the weeks leading up to election day during early voting. I know some individuals who do that. Or like here in Columbus, we have 2 Saturdays that you can vote. And so there's a lot of flexibility and not just election day.
We can pause too to see if there are any questions before we move into the next section. Anybody have about voting rights or being a poll worker? Feel free or unmute yourself or put it in the chat. We have Alexia. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Alexia. I was curious, since you are a poll worker, how well do you think Indiana handles training on accessibility for their poll workers?
Yeah, so in full transparency, I haven't been a poll worker in a while, just because I'm an elected official currently, so that they frown upon that. So from what I've heard, at least in my community, and maybe Kristen can touch on the broader state, but it's fairly good, the training here in a local community. But Columbus is fairly small, so maybe there's some other opinions for larger cities like Indianapolis.
This is Kristen. In a personal capacity, I have been a poll worker the last 2 or 3 elections, and you have to go through the training every time. And as much as I wish we could do a role play and pretend to help a voter with disabilities and things like that, we're not at that level, at least in Marion County, where I live, which is Indianapolis. But they do talk about assisting voters with disabilities in the training, and I appreciate that that is included. And they talk about, under what conditions and how people should ask, and there's a form. They do a pretty thorough job of explaining what that looks like. Now, I can only speak to Marion County because that's where I personally, in my own personal time, have done it, but we have not looked at other counties to be able to see what they're doing. And I think it is, unfortunately, by county decision about what is and is not included in the trainings. So yeah, that's a good question, Alexia. As far as statewide, it's kind of difficult to say, but I think in my experience, it has been pretty good.
And I think we'll touch on this a little bit later about ways to get involved. I mean, if you've been to, you know, a voting station or a poll, and just as a voter even, and you've recognized, you know, maybe they weren't as well trained as you would have hoped, or they didn't know how to answer a question about an accommodation that you've witnessed, you know, I encourage you to reach out to the clerk in your county. In theory, they should be open to those conversations about how to make the polls the most accessible that they can be. They're required by law to obviously be accessible, and providing maybe more intensive training is something that could happen in your county or other counties.
Absolutely. And you could also contact Indiana Disability Rights if you didn't want to have that conversation yourself, or you did and they weren't as open to it as you wish that they would be. We do provide assistance to county clerks and their teams as far as what it looks like to have an accessible election. So would be happy to hear about if there are continuing opportunities based on what you've seen in your experiences, if there are opportunities there for us to get involved and support that work. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Here we go.
Okay, so we know the name of this session is Beyond the Ballot. So what other ways are there to get involved locally in your community, other than the obvious, just voting? My favorite part about local elections is that if you live in a smaller community or even Indianapolis, you know, the odds that you might interact with a local official or elected official are pretty high. Or the odds that you're able to engage in local meetings or things like this are much easier than obviously maybe to flying to DC or even going to Indianapolis if you live on the outskirts of the state. And so taking advantage of the local processes that are happening and local elections is a great way to learn what's happening in your community, because at the end of the day, so many decisions around roads and water quality and again, you know, school board and schools and these things, those decisions happen right at the local level, and extremely important in our day-to-day lives. But one area I encourage individuals, you know, if they're passionate about getting engaged more with local politics per se, or just policy, I encourage you to, you know, find something that is interesting to you and maybe a specific topic. So doing research on that specific topic can be helpful, or just researching what activities or what's happening as far as campaign events for the various parties in your community. Sometimes even, you know, the general clerk's office will host a or at least here in Columbus, occasionally they will host a, you know, voting rights workshop or something like this that's nonpartisan. But getting involved in potential campaign events for individuals who are running or just the general party is a great way to better understand how maybe those local politics tick and how that works, and a great way to educate yourself as well on what might be important to the community in that sense. Other ways to get involved are, as I said, reaching out to campaigns and supporting campaigns. One of those things, you know, that are really important, if you believe in a candidate or you believe in a initiative or a policy, you know, being engaged and supporting that campaign either through volunteerism or potentially through dollars is a great way to get more engaged as well, and to show you know, the disability voice. I think as Kristen mentioned, I am also an individual with a disability. I have a physical disability, and just some of the information, I guess, I've been able to bring to light on different types of committees and things are just about general accessibility. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of policy that's a bit behind when it comes to just following the ADA. And so that's one way to get engaged with that. Or as well, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but making sure that local campaign events or these things are accessible in all the ways that that means, and helping educate candidates as well is extremely useful because some just might not know, how to make their campaign accessible in these things. Sharing social media is a great way to engage with, whether it be posts from your community and straight from your city or a department, and trying to share with your friends and say, hey, what do you think about this issue that popped up in redevelopment? Or how do you think about, this vote that's on the table? And how would that affect individuals with disabilities? I think that's a great way to put the disability lens on things through social media. And then as well, just generally showing up. I say sometimes, it sounds easier than it can be. We all have very busy lives, and I think thankfully there are many versions of showing up now. There are virtual meetings, there are all types of obviously in-person meetings, but if you're able to, attend those city council meetings or those redevelopment meetings or those planning meetings, and if you feel called, speak up during those public comment sessions, because your voice at the end of the day as citizens and community members is what should be most important. And whether that's sharing your personal disability experience or that of a friend or family member, but bringing a new perspective to the table, I think is very beneficial. You can go to the next slide. So the other way, obviously, to get involved is to run for office. And I think it's important to note that not everyone is cut out to run for office. And I don't think that anyone should ever feel pressured to do that. I'll be honest, someone asked me to run and I don't know how to say no. So that's why I got where I am. But at the end of the day, I thought about it and I said, I look at the city council and I don't see a lot of younger representation. I didn't see a lot of a female representation. I didn't see any visible disability representation. There could have been and could be some invisible, but I do believe using a wheelchair full time as I do can be a different insight than maybe different types of disabilities. And so I thought, well, okay, I think I can bring some perspective, hopefully. There's a lot I have to learn. But at the end of the day, I hope that my life experience, and whether my schooling or just like, I did grow up here in Columbus, I just want to bring a different perspective to the table. And so if you're ever thinking about running for office, always think about, what's your why? Are you running for one specific issue, which can be okay, but knowing that once you are elected, hopefully, that obviously there are more than one issues that come to the table. And so being open and mindful of all the issues and potential responsibilities that you might have. I think as well, understanding what the role is of that elected official. Obviously, school board is very different than city council. I get a lot of feedback as a city councilor that I have no control over, because it might be a county council issue or it might be a school board issue. Like property taxes are often county or school board related. And so knowing really what that role does, so maybe you can decipher what office you want to run for and where could you lend your perspective the most. Another big thing is checking in with your family and employer. This might sound like an obvious one, but depending on where you work, they might not be a fan of you running for office. And so I think it's good to run that by your employer, especially if you work for a larger employer. Some employers might not want you to, take time off of work during the day, unfortunately. If you currently work for any type of government, city, state, you cannot, obviously you can't campaign on your work time. And so thinking about that, and depending on the office you're running for, some people choose to step away from their work during that time if it's a larger office. And then obviously your family. You want to make sure your family's on board with your vision or just with your interest. They should be your number one cheerleaders and helping you get that vote and get those other people in your community engaged. Connecting with your local party. Anyone can go register per se to run for office. You run into some interesting situations in Indiana. If your voting record is predominantly one party or the other, sometimes you have to get the sign off of the party that you are hoping to run with. And so potentially checking your voting record, not saying you wouldn't be able to run, but because we do primaries just a little bit differently in Indiana. And then I tell people this all the time. Even if you're just thinking about running for office, connect with your current elected officials. They're a great resource to understand what is this job about. For example, being a city councilor is totally different than I ever thought it was going to be. In some ways, much more mundane, but in some ways, there's a lot more responsibility and fiscal responsibility than I ever imagined. And so connecting with those elected officials, even just to learn, what are their priorities? What are the city priorities? How can you be a good citizen and help them? That's a great way to get engaged as well. Some of these last couple things are, building a team and fundraising. Your local party would likely be able to help you and support you through building a team. Or again, oftentimes if it's a smaller office, like city councilor or county council, you might just have friends and family who are supporting you. Or you might be the one person show, for managing the social media and designing the logos and all of that. And never be afraid to ask for help. I think that's something I realized as I was running for office. While friends and family might say, I'm not really a political person. I'm not really into that. They likely still support you and your mission. And so whether they, want to get too involved in the politics side of it, that's okay. Again, you're running to provide a new perspective. You're running, if you so choose, you're running to, as the individual. And at least at the local level, I wish there really were party sides, because at the end of the day, we're even at the state and national, we're all trying to help people in our community and support our community and our constituents. And so if your friends and family can share that, then that's a good amount of support. And then the last one we kind of talked about, but engaging with the community. You got to be out there. You got to be willing to attend events, and you don't necessarily have to be the biggest social butterfly there is, but being present in one way or another definitely matters, because people want to feel that their elected officials are accessible and they can call them, or they can find them on social media, or they can ask them a question. People often ask me if I run into someone, even out to dinner or something, like they're like, well, I don't want to talk I don't want to bug you or talk politics, but can you tell me about this trash pickup service or something? So you've got to be okay with that and people's questions, and also being okay with it's going to take a lot of time to maybe learn everything, or how should I rephrase this? It's impossible to know everything. And being okay with that and understanding the resources that are out there, I think is crucial when you're thinking about running for office, that you don't have to do it alone. And it's, if people might say, well, you have no experience or something like that, I think you can come back with, well, a lot of elected officials, the first time they were elected, don't have a lot of experience. And as long as people are, honest, genuine people who are doing it for the right reasons, I think that's a good start. Anything else to add, or anyone have any questions?
I had one. Can you work the polls like in shifts? Like, do you have to stay all day, or can you break it up with others?
That's probably a county specific question or a city specific question. I know here in Columbus that they will allow you to break that up and the hours on that. So that would be a question for the clerk.
Okay, thanks.
This is Kristen, and Linda, I don't know where you're located, but in Marion County, I have only worked split shifts. Not that they didn't need people all day, but because of other commitments, I could only do a half day. And they give you half pay for it, but that's fine because you're there for half the time. But I find that a good way to be able to be involved without having to pull the entire shift.
All right. Yeah, I am in Marion County. Thanks for that, Kristen.
Sure. Other questions, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. Okay.
I guess there's a couple things I did want to add just about running for, I didn't necessarily have a bullet under this, but it falls under a lot of them. And that's, running for office with a disability. I think the perk of doing that is that you get to set the example maybe for other candidates that, this is how you have accessible events. This is how you, are accessible through multiple platforms, digital, in person. But I don't want to sugarcoat it. And I think it's important to know that you also bump into those community barriers. And because you're out and about more in the community, you understand or see events or community events that might not be fully accessible or fully welcoming. And so it's a great opportunity, while frustrating sometimes, to educate yourself on, how's the city doing on city events and as far as accessibility. How accessible is the city hall or the county offices? I will say when I started running for office, there was no ADA compliant bathroom in the city hall. And a lot of that was just because no one had really ever said anything. And they had a makeshift situation, but because I was running for office and in City Hall a lot more, it became very obvious. And so it brought about some change. And so whether you get elected or not, there's a lot of impact you can make by helping, those who are organizing the election be accommodating. So no matter what type of disability you have, and maybe, for example, they have a forum or a public debate. And because an individual is running with a disability, they might have to make accommodations to that. And so you are helping educate individuals and kind of leading the way for other people to run as well. And so I think that was eye-opening to me, that I was making a difference whether I was going to win or not. And so something to keep in mind. Okay, so other opportunities to get engaged in your community. Likely, if you have found a candidate that you are really passionate about, whether that's a friend or just another candidate, or maybe just you're interested in engaging with the local party or just the local clerk's office, like being a poll worker. Local parties always need volunteers, and volunteers can help door knock or phone bank. There are nonpartisan opportunities as well for door knocking. Maybe it's an issue that the city's trying to gauge how people feel in the community. And so they might door knock just saying, we're polling people on how do you feel about these streets or the water utilities or something like that. And so engaging with local parties can connect you with those opportunities. As I mentioned, I use a wheelchair, so I'm actually not very good at door knocking because there's oftentimes many steps. But I am good at phone banking. And so phone banking is a great way to get involved from the comfort of your own home. And you can be calling on behalf of a candidate or a party, and they give you a script, they give you the numbers in the system, and it's pretty straightforward. And so if you're able to do that, that is a great way to do that and flex around the time availability. We talked about this a little bit with social media, but sharing guides and information about registration and absentee voting. Through my position at the ARC and then even through a city councilor, I've been really adamant at making sure that people understand how to register to vote and then also how to register for absentee voting. Thankfully now, you can absentee vote for just about any reason, and especially if you have a disability. And there's actually an application that you can fill out in the spring that is an absentee ballot registration for the primary and the general election. And that is a form that Indiana has. And so I encourage individuals to use that form if they are unable to get to the polls. Other piece of information about voting and accessibility, some communities have traveling boards. And so this is a group of people literally who are traveling with the voting machine to a location. You often see this at potentially senior living or assisted living places where there's multiple types of people. But depending on your community, you could maybe organize something like that. Maybe if there's a facility or somewhere, a group of individuals who would struggle getting to the polls, and it would be more beneficial for them to, have the voting machine brought to them. And so lots of opportunities to vote, and the early voting, of course, but ways to engage is sharing those guides. There's so many guides about voting. IDR has them, the ARC of Indiana, multiple agencies around the state have great voting guides that help people get registered very easily, or absentee voting. Other ways to get engaged obviously are, I'm sure Kristen will talk about this maybe towards the end, but some other IDR events, attending trainings like this, or just sharing with individuals what's happening around the state, and using IDR as a resource, whether that's for your clerk or for your local party or just for yourself. I know I've been on their website many times just to reconfirm, what is this specific voting regulation or right, and finding the best way to communicate that to the public. I talked about this when I talked about showing up, but showing up to city meetings, whether that's virtually or in person, or town halls and debates, it's just a great way to educate yourself. And if you feel called again to speak up and share your opinions or thoughts on a topic, I think that's even better. I think public comment is extremely valued and unfortunately not as welcomed as it should be. Again, we are of the people, and your voice matters. And at the end of the day, if the majority of the community feels strongly about something, your elected officials to take that to heart and make decisions that are, based on the majority of the community's feelings. And so it's also eye-opening to attend city meetings like city planning. I was just blown away, how many processes they have and how important city planning is, from zoning to code enforcement to everything. And so maybe you are passionate about a specific issue. Let's call it accessible housing. planning and getting engaged with sitting planning and reaching out to them and attending planning meetings is a great way to start, because your community could potentially implement an ordinance for accessible housing. We're requiring, apartment units to have XYZ accessibility standards, maybe even above and beyond the ADA. I've seen some other communities require new home builds to have at least one stepless entrance, so that there's opportunities for that. So those are issue-based ways to get engaged around disability, and as well, call out the inaccessibilities. I can tell you right now that our community unfortunately does not have closed captioning on our live streams of our city meetings. And one would think that would be very easy, but the amount of pushback I've received is a lot. But the more people who potentially speak up about concerns like that, is how change happens. So that kind of relates to the disability advocacy piece. You can be a disability advocate without running for office, without working at a poll, without volunteering for a campaign, just by showing up to city related functions and giving that feedback. Because of whether, again, you're the individual with a disability or a family or a friend, you're able to share that insight. I always say, hopefully, once people know better, they do better. And a lot of times around disability, I think people are just not aware of either accommodations. As odd as that may sound, we feel or at least I am, it's your entire life. And so that some people might not understand just general accommodations seems silly, but there's a lot of that. And it can be overlooked as well in planning and events and things like that. And so being just a disability advocate or a voice for that, I think is crucial in your community, whether it's at the local level or the state or even the national level. So, anything to add, Kristen, on these other engagement opportunities?
I think you've covered a lot, Grace, and there really are so many opportunities. I mean, obviously you can run for office, and that is, a lofty goal and something that we do need, more people with disabilities representing us in those types of positions. But even at just a local level, doing things like this increase the disability representation, the disability voice, and the disability power in all of these different facets that are involved in the election process. And it's really fascinating to see you break it down this way, because it's not just like vote, campaign, run for office. There's so many ways that you can be involved in your community and make a difference for what you care about. So I will mention a few IDR opportunities. You can attend different events that we have like this. And then we also, during the early voting period, go out to polling places to survey to see how they're doing when it comes to the ADA accessibility checklist. And we train community partners to help increase our capacity to reach more counties. So if that's something that you would be interested in doing, we are always happy to welcome new people onto that. I will make sure to put my contact information in the chat afterward, so that you can have that and let me know if that's something that you would like details on. Are there any questions at this point?
So my name is Michael Shermas, and I'm work with the Council for Community Accessibility in Bloomington. So I've worked with people with disabilities for the last 7 or 8 years, and helping them in a variety of different ways. I think Bloomington has an amazing community and does so many things in the area of accessibility and helping people with disabilities. And I get to play a big role in that. But I will admit to being jealous of Columbus for a couple, besides Heracos. Jealous of Columbus for a couple reasons. One would definitely be the assignment of polling locations. That's like, wow, that would be nice. And the other, of course, is Grace, because I mean, geez, who
Michael and I have connected before.
who wouldn't want a beautiful, smart, savvy person in a wheelchair to be out representing people with disabilities? I mean, I just think you're ideal. So
Thank you.
yeah. So, and I've had the opportunity to work with you before, Grace. And I guess my big question is, I want the opportunity to work with you again. Would you consider coming to Bloomington in August of next year? I know that seems like way out there, but when I think about it, I mean, this is Disability Voting Rights Week this week, right? And so that will probably be around the same time next year. And what I'd love for you to do is come in August with the, like, let's get the community revved up to be a little more involved in that. While we do things that are political, we don't do as much overt, like get to polling locations, get people voting, be a poll worker. We do more things like helping legislation for the accessible transportation and mobility principles that we've been working on for a couple of years, or helping the Indiana Association of the Deaf with the closed captioning effort that they want to do around the state and are having troubles, and so they're trying here in Bloomington. So I think that you might be a great kickoff for that, just having you come and do that. So that's what my ask is, my question.
Happy to help. Happy to help. And Michael does hail from Bloomington, where they have accessibility and disability really ingrained in their community. He's a city staffer, and I wish Columbus in some ways was more like Bloomington. We're all, I think that's the best piece about, working together and things like IDR is where we can collaborate and learn from other communities, and how we can use that disability voice to impact policy and just what's happening in our community. And so I admire what you guys do over there, and so happy to help anytime in the future, of course.
Yeah. Well, we do things too, like I had a role a few years ago when Rotary volunteered to help deliver the voting machine. So they gave us a nice donation, and after a while they finally got smart and said, yeah, we should do this with a professional instead of a bunch of old geezers dragging around the machines and huffing and puffing. 32 polling locations is a lot too, let me tell you, with that many machines and all that equipment. And so they finally got somebody professional, but it really helped me because I knew the polling locations really well. And so when they asked us, the county came and asked us and said, would you do accessibility surveys of all the polling locations? I'm like, yes, we know where that is. I'm sure we can get enough people to jump in on this effort. And everybody did. And that was really cool. But again, I mean, it was like helping it out, but I don't think anybody's a poll worker. We have somebody who's involved with, getting people to vote, and we have some people involved with policy issues, but we don't have somebody like you, and we don't have a lot of people with disabilities who are poll workers, and so I keep hoping. So thank you for
thank you. So, and I think Michael makes an interesting point about if you do choose to run for office as someone with a disability, there's a lot of eyes on you, and I think it absolutely therefore opens other people's eyes that someone with a disability can run for office and be an active participant in our community, and someone with a disability can be directly involved in policy change and bring about that perspective again. So I like to say, I'm not I don't speak for everyone with a disability, but I hope that I can bring my perspective and at least the things that I've experienced to make it, things better for those members in our community. So.
I just got to tell you one more thing, Grace. Just since I've known you, I've also become the human rights director for the city.
Congratulations!
Thanks. Well, I think it's a lot of work, but what's interesting is that I swear the vast majority of the cases have to do with disabilities as opposed to race, religion, sexual orientation. I mean, I have all those, but more in the area of disabilities than anything. And I'm forced to try to help people like deal with what they think are accommodations and whether they are or aren't, and whether there was discrimination or not. And it just surprised me how much of the issues and complaints we get are from people with disabilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. We talked a little bit about engaging with your local just offices of the city. Human Rights Department is a great way to learn more and provide your feedback if you're an individual with a disability, and get engaged, because even in Columbus as well, you'll find there are other areas to advocate, whether it's for renter rights for people who have disabilities, and helping advocate for that and sharing that information, across your community, that ultimately helps people maintain apartments or homes or these things. And so connecting and finding ways to engage and volunteer in your human rights office is also a good way to get engaged. So.
And wanted to, just since we have about 5 minutes left, if anybody is feeling inspired and wants to share something that maybe they're interested in doing, or perhaps plan to do based on what we've talked about tonight, or maybe you had the thought about it before tonight, anybody, something that they can do to get involved beyond just casting your ballot, doing a little bit more in your community here in this next election. If you want to think about it, that's totally okay too. I have put my contact information in the chat. If you have any questions, please reach out. I also put some information about Indiana Disability Rights' voting specific webpage. It's HoosiersVote.org. You can get that there. And before we leave, I'm going to put the link to our YouTube channel there as well, because that's where we will post the recording. Let me see. Oh, and we have a very short 6-question feedback survey. We would love to know how this went for you. This is the first time that we've done a presentation. So it really helps us to hear from you what went well and what you would like to see moving forward. So if you do decide to do something to get more involved, please reach out. We would love to hear about that. And certainly if you have any other questions, feel free to bring those up now. But I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their Monday evening to come and hear from Grace and consider getting involved in the election process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, IDR, for hosting this, and Kristen and everyone who attended. I think I can add my contact information down here if anyone is ever interested to chat more, learn more, all the above. Happy to connect.
Thanks, Kristen, for doing this, and thank you, Grace, for obviously stepping up, and I will be in contact.
That sounds good. I always see your emails from your group in my inbox, so I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.